Hey guys, today we'll be having Coach Mark Gottfried on the show. He's a former NC State basketball coach. He also coached at Alabama, his alma mater, for about 11 seasons. He also coached at UCLA and Murray State. He has a lot to unpack, so I'm very excited about this one. We will talk about some of the players that he coached, his journey throughout life, the ups and downs, and how he's handled that through faith. So looking forward to this one. Hope you guys enjoy, and welcome back to the show. Hey guys, welcome back to the Parker Byrd Show here in the Legless Lounge. I am very excited about today's guest. He's a guy that's been around the game of basketball for a very long time at just about every level. He played at Alabama back in the day, and he's coached at some of the biggest programs in the nation, including Alabama, NC State, UCLA, and Murray State. Coach Gottfried is in the house today, and we're very excited. If you know anything about college basketball, you know his name. He's taken some teams very deep into March Madness. He's coaching some big-time players, and he's got over 400 wins to his name. Very impressive. But what I really respect about Coach is not just the wins. It's how he's handled the tough situations in his life as well. He's been fired. He's been going through some personal challenges, and he's still standing, still leading, and still speaking truth. And that says a lot about who he is. We're going to talk about his playing days, his love for Alabama, the highs and the lows of coaching, his faith, and how he's seen the game, and how life has changed him. We'll also dive into his connection with Ed Oannon and how that story helped change college athletics forever. So, Coach, thank you for coming on to the show, and we're really pumped up.
I am fired up to be here, man. I'm so proud of you. I've learned your story. Now I follow you everywhere. And a lot of people don't know I'm a baseball fan, too. Now, when I was at NC State, Elliot Avent had me in the dugout and in the clubhouse. And so, anyway, I'm a baseball nut along with being a basketball guy. So
I
this is going
love
to
it.
be fun.
I love it. Coach Avance, he's a top-notch dude. And, I had some friends at NC State. They play there, and there's nothing but good words about him. So he's a top-notch guy. But, Coach, can walk us through what made you fall in love with the game of basketball from a very young age?
When I was younger, my father was when I was very small, he was a high school basketball coach. And so, I was the little guy sitting on the end of the bench and, bouncing balls during practice and, couldn't wait for the game to end so I could run out there and shoot a little bit. But then he became a small college coach and then a Division I coach and later became an athletic director at the University of South Alabama. And his brother, Mike Gottfried, my uncle, was a football coach in college at Kansas and Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. And then I've got my cousins, Jim and John Harbaugh, both now NFL head coaches. So I just grew up around sports. It was always, competing, and specifically in basketball for me. But, I fell in love with it because, I just loved the game. And it was something I could do by myself. I could get a ball. I could go to a park. I could go in the driveway. I could go anywhere, and I could work on my skills. And I could try to get better. And so I just loved it, and it has opened so many doors throughout my life for me. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, that's one thing my dad's always said is, hey, make sure your son or kid plays a sport that they can practice on their own. Because with a game of baseball, only thing you can do on your own is hit off a tee, and that gets pretty boring after a while. So that's cool. But how did playing at Alabama and what did that mean like to you, and how did those years shape the rest of your life?
When I was younger, Parker, I was like a lot of young people. I wanted to be the best that I could be, and I learned early on really not to compare myself to other people, but how good can I be? And I took that on as a challenge. I set goals for myself when I was early, about the eighth, ninth, 10th grade. I really started getting serious about setting goals, and I wanted to play college basketball at the highest level. And I was very fortunate to do that. Playing in the SEC was amazing. The athletes in that league, and even to this day, but in the
Mm-hmm.
mid '80s, Arkansas and LSU and Kentucky and Auburn and Florida. I mean, go on and on in Georgia. There were some guys playing now that were really good. It had great coaches too, but I wanted to play at the highest level, and I had a great opportunity to do that. And then, it was fun because our team had great success. We played in three straight Sweet 16s. We won an SEC championship, a tournament championship, and I played with great players too. So, uh, it was one of those things for me that I was very fortunate. I felt like I worked hard to get there,
Mm-hmm.
but to play in the SEC as a college athlete in basketball was a lot of fun for me.
Who's the guy that you've played with throughout your career that you still talk to, on either a daily basis or just catch up with them a good bit? Who's that one guy?
Well, we had great players. Interesting. I think in my 3 years that I started, all 3 years as a sophomore to my senior, I think we had maybe nine pros that
Wow.
played alongside of us. All of us got drafted basically into the NBA. But my running mate and my roommate was a guy named Jim Farmer. Jim was a first round draft pick by Dallas when we left Alabama and played about 4 or 5 years in the league. And he and I talk all the time. But that whole team that I kind of played on in college, even my college coach, who's now I think 87 or 88 years old, Wimp Sanderson, still stay in contact with him on a regular basis, and
That's
uh,
awesome.
and the guys on our team, stay in touch. It's a you develop a bond with your teammates. A lot of people that don't play sports, they don't understand that. When you
Yeah.
you share that locker room and you share all those practices that you've gone through, and the games and the highs and the lows of the games, you develop a camaraderie there with your buddies. So we just had a great group of people. But Jim Farmer would be the one for me. He and I talk probably every week or two, and so that's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's the relationship piece is, the biggest thing I think that people can get out of sports because you get tied into so many relationships throughout the course. And from your experience, you've seen on both ends, coaching and playing, and you actually returned to coach at Alabama. How was that? That full circle moment, and how that feel getting to coach your alma mater?
It was a wonderful thing. I'm so grateful and blessed for that to happen to me. And I can remember, Parker. I was a coach at Murray State, and I knew Alabama's job might potentially open up. And we had a couple, two or three really good teams at Murray State. And I called John Wooden, the great coach from UCLA. And
Mm-hmm.
when I was at UCLA as an assistant, he and I had become close. And I remember asking him about, going back to your alma mater. He had never gone back to his alma mater, which was Purdue, and I asked him how come. And I remember him telling me, he said, just understand that when you go back to your alma mater, the pressure is a little greater because you're going to want to deliver for your school probably more than you would a different place. And the fans, because they're excited about having a former player then become the coach, they're even more excited. And so sometimes it kind of raises the bar a little bit. And it's a great thing. I was so blessed to be the head coach at Alabama for 11 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, there's some other things that come along with it that make it a little bit harder because of those expectations. But I remember when I got the call, Parker, I was pumped, I was excited, to have a chance to go back and coach at a place where you wore the uniform.
Mm-hmm.
That's something not everybody gets to do, and so I was very very fortunate for that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. you went from Alabama to NC State to UCLA. How did your coaching style kind of evolve throughout those years? Because that's three different universities in a lot of years too. So the game of basketball is changing. So how did your coaching style kind of change throughout those years?
Well, I was lucky, Parker. Again, my I was around coaching growing up with my dad and my uncle specifically. I played for a great coach in Wimp Sanderson at Alabama. I worked as an assistant for a great coach at UCLA and Jim Herrick, but I also, had 7 years where I got to sit at the feet of John Wooden. And a lot of people, as time goes on, you kind of forget a little bit. But, just as a reminder, he won 10 national championships in 12 years, 10
Yeah,
out of 12. And so, uh, I had the unbelievable opportunity to drive out to his house and sit and talk and, bounce all the ideas off of him and develop a philosophy and kind of take some of the things obviously he did because we did a lot of those at UCLA, but it really kind of gave me a foundation for then how I wanted to kind of incorporate all the things that I felt were important in coaching too. So again, not everybody gets to do that, and I recognize that and have that opportunity that I had with Coach John Wooden, who I would argue with anybody. I know we've had a lot of great coaches out there, but if you went 10 out of 12 to me, you kind of climbed to the top of the chart, no matter who's out there. So
your
I got a chance
success
to be
rate's a
around
lot
the best.
higher than a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You have been around a lot of teams and you've coached for a lot of seasons. What's one team or one season that you've coached that really stands out in your memory, and why is that?
There's two. I'm gonna jump out. Obviously, the national championship when I was at UCLA as an assistant, but two times as a head coach. One was in 2004 at Alabama. We had a team that got into the NCAA tournament. I think we were actually the last team's name to be called, and I want to say our record might have been 16-12. We had a lot of close games that we lost, but we had played the toughest schedule in the country. And that team got on a roll and made it all the way to the Elite Eight. We were 40 minutes away from a Final Four. It was the first time Alabama had ever been to an Elite Eight. And it was just an amazing run that our team had. And then I would go back and say at NC State, my very first year, and I inherited a group of guys at NC State that were talented, but they had struggled. They had finished 10th out of 12 in the ACC. They were hungry. Every guy on that team was hungry, and we ended up going to the Sweet 16, and in that game we got Kansas right to the wire, and ended up losing I think by 2 or 3 points. And if we'd have won that game, it'd have been our fourth crack. We had split with Carolina during the regular season. We got beat in the semifinals in the ACC tournament by Carolina, but our players really wanted a chance at them. But to take that team, that had struggled so bad the year before, and in our very first year go to the Sweet 16, that was pretty significant. That was a lot of fun.
And who doesn't ever want to crack at UNC? So that's awesome. What's one player that just kind of stands out that has changed you as a person throughout your coaching career? I know there's probably been a bunch of players that you build those relationships with that change you as a person, but who do you think has that most amount of impact in your life?
There's been so many, Parker. It's a tough question. It's a good question, but it's hard. I had great players at NC State. I loved them to death. Stay in contact with a lot of them, and I was glad I was able to help them.
Yeah.
I coached Ed Oannon. We're going to talk about Ed, I'm sure, at some point at UCLA. That changed the whole landscape with the NIL and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a young guy at Alabama that I invited to join our program as a walk-on, and he had scholarship offers to Alabama A&M and Alabama State, and I asked him to walk on, and it was he was dying for me to say the word scholarship, and anyway, he came as a freshman. I put him in some games, and I put him in, and I couldn't take him out. I just didn't want to take him out of the game, and he just really blossomed and was a great story. And I gave him a scholarship after that first year. And then as a senior, he was the basically the heart and soul of the team that went to the Elite Eight, the team I mentioned from 2004. His name is Antoine Petway. And he's the head coach now at Kennesaw State. He's having a great career. But, I probably never had a player overachieve more than he did.
Yeah.
I coached great players, highly, highly recruited guys. I've had two or three number one players in the country.
Wow.
But when you see a guy kind of overachieve and just
Mm-hmm.
do more than you ever anticipated, it just that guy kind of stands off the page a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. That's incredible. Especially, we actually one of our best players this year is a walk on, and everybody talks about he's a walk on, but it adds like that fire underneath you, and it kind of just gets you rolling. And a guy like that, you know, because coming from a walk on position, it's like they want to earn it more, and they kind of have that personality trait that can lead the whole team. And once guys start buying into that, then that really can move everybody. So that's incredible. Hey guys, want to take a quick second and thank today's sponsor of the show, Children Health Services. Children Health Services provides top-notch care from the day your child was born in the hospital. All the doctors there are top-notch, so make sure you guys go and check them out. They have a location on Arlington Boulevard and have a new location coming soon on 10th Street. So make sure you guys go and check them out, and thank you for the sponsor of the show. You had an incredible career, but it wasn't without obviously tough moments. Everybody goes through tough moments in life, ups and downs. And you recently made a post about being fired from Alabama. And tell me about, the struggles and lessons that you learned from this season of your life and just about being fired.
Well, I think everybody goes through tough times. You've been through them, obviously, yourself in a different kind of way. And we all go through them. I think sometimes when we're
Mm-hmm.
younger, we just don't really anticipate them. We never think those tough times are really going to
That's right.
come to us, but they're going to. They're going to happen one way or another. And it could be death. It could be injury. In your case, obviously, it could be like me, where I've had some situations like that at Alabama, and they're difficult, they're hard, and to put it into some context, again, we talked about it. I played at Alabama. I was the head coach there for 11 years, and my family lived in Mobile, Alabama, and really that was home for me.
Yeah.
And when that happens, and usually when it happens in sports, it's not the general fan base, it's not everybody in the athletic department. It's usually one or two people that make the call. That's it. It's
Mm-hmm.
one or two people, but it hurts. And I can remember, kind of heading home, and I laid in bed for a couple, 2 or 3 days, and I didn't want to get out of bed. And you're laying there in kind of a fetal position, like, man, this, I'm embarrassed,
Yeah.
and you're hurt and saddened. But then there's another part of you, and it was for me. And you're such a great role model yourself, Parker. But there's another part that starts to kick in a little bit that says, I'm not exempt from all this. I mean, everybody goes through
Mm-hmm.
difficult times. And then how am I going to get myself back up off the deck? And, it's there are great lessons that we learn in those times. That's when we really figure out who we really are, what we're really made of, and also who's really kind of around you that's really going to be there for you in tough times. We all have a lot of friends, and they're amazing and they're wonderful. But sometimes friends kind of drift away, and then all of a sudden you kind of get this core, two or three or four people that are, it's your family, and a couple people that are kind of in your corner. So for me, I've always starting with kind of that one, it was an opportunity for me to figure out how am I going to turn this into something positive. It's got to,
Mm-hmm.
there's a positive in it. It's a test of our own will and kind of who we are and what we're made of. And I've also been a guy, Parker, through all of those, not to make excuses. Things happen in life, and a lot of times, not always, but sometimes, we've made the mistakes that lead to these decisions, like
Mm-hmm.
I went to, and so or went through. So you have to be accountable. You have to be honest. I always say when I speak all over the country. Nothing happens without self honesty.
Yeah.
People love to kind of sugarcoat things, even to themselves. They're not going to be
Right.
all the way honest to say, this is what happened, this is why it happened. And I think if you are self honest and you have that ability, then and you can kind of overcome anything. And
Yeah.
so, great lessons I've learned throughout the way. Doesn't mean it's not difficult. Doesn't mean it's easy. But if you're open to learning those lessons, boy, there's a lot of lessons that come in those tough times.
Yeah, that's powerful. And Coach Gottfried, you once said that what some people see as an end, God sees as a new beginning. You know that right there speaks a lot of truth, and that's the mindset. You know that you almost have to adapt whenever you go through tough times like you went through. Just kind of talk about that mindset and kind of unpack that mindset for the listeners listening to this.
Parker, I think for me, there have been times in my life where I feel like, I haven't turned my back on my faith, but there are times I feel like I've really drifted away.
Mm-hmm.
And when I speak to groups, a lot of times I use the example of, if you take a compass and you look at a shattered compass, it's all shattered, the glass is broken on your little compass. And that's kind of sometimes the example of our moral compass. And there are times where I feel like mine has been shattered and I've allowed it to be shattered. And
Right.
the key is, how do you restore it? How do you put that thing back together? How do you put the compass, your moral compass, back together? And so for me, I feel like looking back, there's great lessons for me to learn along the way. But my faith has always been important to me. It's important. Was important to me as a dad to my children, and I want it to be there now. And I think that again, when I look back on my life, and it doesn't mean I wouldn't have had problems or I wouldn't have potentially gotten fired in coaching, but I do think at times that my faith, when I look way back, the drifting away from who I was at my core, probably hurt me more than anything.
Yeah. Whenever you were talking right there, it kind of reminded me of the picture, and it's kind of going viral, especially the past couple of years or so. But it's God's hand reaching out, and it's a person's hand, and it's kind of like not fully extended, but God's is, and it just kind of resembles that. You know, God's always is reaching out for us, and it's really us that moves away, and that can be hard to learn because you're like you go through seasons in lives and some people lean into their faith, other people, drift away, and you know, it really can make a difference. And those
Mm-hmm.
two mindsets are pretty key. And you also recently posted on Instagram about staying positive through all seasons in life, even when the world doubts you. What inspired those posts, and what message are you hoping to share with those posts?
Well, I often talk about, what I call the GID approach. It's kind of a get it done mindset. And, I talk about grit and integrity and, uh, you know, um, and I talk about desire and all those things. But I just think that for all of us, there are, we have an opportunity every day, all of us do, to make a choice in how we're going to live our lives and whether we're going to impact other people or not, or whether we're just, self-absorbed into our own world. And everybody has that opportunity every single day. And so for me, it's just kind of a constant reminder just to get it done. You have to get it done. We all do every day, whatever we're doing. And even in the toughest of times, as an athlete, you face it obviously with things that have happened in your life. But even on top of that, just fatigue. Some people, they can't fight through fatigue. Some
Mm-hmm.
athletes that I've coached, they don't have, and you want to bring it out in them, but they don't have that kind of inner competitive nature that kind of pushes them when it's the most difficult times. And so there's just so many lessons to be learned along the way. And for me, it always comes back to the GID kind of approach. It's a get it done mindset.
Yeah, yeah. Here at ECU, our motto this year is win today, but win stands for what's important now. And that kind of reminds me of it, that the get it done mindset, and, what's important now is like be where your feet are, all that good stuff is really important because the stacking 1% can't come, unless you get whatever task in front of you is done at that moment. So that's awesome. And you just talked about your faith a little bit, but what role does your faith play in the seasons of uncertainty or even a rebuilding phase?
Parker, it's you and I could have a 5 hour conversation on that one. But at the end of the day, the old saying, um, God has a plan for us, and boy, there are times that we all do it. Now we are struggling as hard as we can to force a round peg in a square hole. I mean, we are doing our best to jam that. I'm just going to I'm going to make it fit no matter what. And sometimes it's interesting. Now I'm getting a little bit older. Now that I'm older, I look back at times, and sometimes you just say to yourself, "Man, if I would have just trusted God a little bit more with what He has placed in front of me every day, life would be a whole lot easier." Because we just seem to make it hard, because it's hard sometimes, especially I think those of us that are really competitive, that I can figure out I'm going to do it. I'm doing it on my own, no matter what. And so many times I think the answer is, yeah, you got to try hard, and you got to lay it all out there. But at the end of the day, understanding that in the biggest picture, the bigger picture of life, God's got it. He's
Yeah.
got us, and He's got our back, and He wants what's best for us. And usually it's us that get in the way every time. And I know that's been true in my own life as well.
100%. His plan's always greater than ours, and that's something that throughout my journey, my accident, it was really hard to see his plan in the beginning, and it can be really hard for a lot of people as well when adversity hits in life. That you always ask why me, God, or what's the purpose in this? But my favorite scripture, or one of my favorite scriptures, is Jeremiah 29:11, and it just kind of tells us that His plan's not to harm us, and His plans to prosper us and to give us hope in the future. And that is kind of what we leaned on in the hard times, is His words, because they're true no matter what season you're in life. Hey guys, I want to take another second and thank another sponsor of today's show, Shimmer Boutique. Shimmer has a live new website at shimmerboutiqueonline.com. Any purchase over $100 receives free shipping to you. They have some of the top-notch brands, including Pimp Shrimp, Local Boy, Yeti, and a lot of other cool stuff. They have a location in Winterville, Greenville, Jacksonville, and have that new online website at shimmerboutiqueonline.com. Make sure you guys go and check them out, and thank you guys. Back to the show. Has it, have there been special moments, on or off the court, that where you truly has surrender your life, your faith, and control into God's hands?
Well, I think there's been a lot of them. There's been a lot of times I think I haven't. Again, like I
Yeah.
said, I'm trying to do everything on my own, but there's just so many of them. And, when you're a parent, uh, with your children, I think that's probably, the love you have for your children, and the things that you want them, and the
Mm-hmm.
kind of people that you want them to become. um, it's something I pray about all the time. It's every day. And, I've went through tough times. I went through a difficult divorce,
Mm-hmm.
probably 12, 13 years ago. And then God brought me an amazing woman that I'm now married to. And so never in my wildest dreams would I've ever thought that I would be married to someone that has younger children.
Yeah.
And I'm back in the carpool line. I used to, all my buddies, I thought I was retired from the carpool line. Now I'm back. But there are
That's
so
awesome.
many things that I've just learned in my life, that if I will truly trust that God has uh, in mind for me what's best for me, I think just life becomes so much better.
Yeah. That's funny. Back in the carpool line. That's awesome. And yeah, you have faced a lot of personal challenges as well. Like you mentioned, going through the divorce. How did you navigate that? Spiritually and emotionally, because that can be very taxing on both ends. How did kind of manage that and navigate through that?
It was hard. I'm gonna be honest with you, and I think the hardest thing is your children.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people. I made a post on LinkedIn about my divorce, and it went on, I think, Instagram and Facebook and those type things. The response was off the chart. I mean, the floodgates opened up because so many people that it's happened to them as well, and they've
Mm-hmm.
walked in those shoes, and they've seen, what's the difficult part of what's happened with your children. And because as parents, what we never want to do as a parent is to hurt your child. That's the
Right.
last thing in the world we'd ever want to do. And sometimes, that happens. And so, I went through a real difficult time with that, trying to struggle with um, guilt and blame and just anger and frustration. I think a lot of people that go through divorce probably maybe go through similar things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over time, and I probably, to be honest, to be candid, as soon as I was out of the divorce, I dove into deep end and was out there kind of floating around in the abyss, like a lot of people do. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually, again, you're coming back to the foundation of, who am I? What am I all about? My faith has always been important to me. That's been my foundation. And when you kind of come back to that, and it's taken me some bumps in the road along the way, but then you kind of, that foundation is there, and you can start building upon that again. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was really difficult. It was a very, very hard thing. It doesn't leave me. Probably not a day goes by you don't think about it. It's just something that's part of your life. I never anticipated. Most people never
Mm-hmm.
get married thinking they're going to end up being divorced one day. That's just not
Right.
part of the game plan. But it
Right.
happens, and again, you got to find a way to find the positive within it.
Definitely. And what would you say to, as men, men struggle with this a lot, and divorce rate is definitely high. So what would you say to, the guy out there that's struggling right now, that's trying to keep their family together, or, just they're walking through a broken time? What would you say to that guy that, is walking that life right now?
Well, Parker, I'm never going to pretend to be a marriage counselor, or
Hmm.
people go to school for a long time to learn the right things to say. But
That's the
uh,
truth.
but to some of the people that I know in my own life, my buddies and different people, I tell them, hang in there, keep fighting, keep fighting. It's divorce is it's the last resort. It's the last thing. It's only until you feel like there is no other option. And it was interesting. I was talking to a Navy SEAL the other day, and they have this motto and talked about when you get into the most difficult times, even in training as a Navy SEAL, and where your body wants to almost retreat away,
Hmm.
that's when you lean in. That's when you go forward and lean in. And I think, the advice I try to give to some of my friends is, lean in, man, lean in. And, and usually it's like life. It's not just divorce. It's most
Hmm.
things. It's usually not always just one person's fault. Usually there's a lot of fault on all sides, but, um, my advice is to fight, 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 man, and until you feel like there's nothing else there, and
Yeah,
then at
that's
that
great.
point it's kind of inevitable. But that's what I try to tell guys. It's because it is a difficult thing as you go on through life.
Yeah, 100%. That's great. Well, Coach, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but you had the opportunity to coach Ed Oannon, man, and during your time at UCLA, what was he like? As a player, as a person, just how was that and the experience with him?
Well, Ed O'Bannon, we were just with him. My wife Gina and I, we were about, it's been a few months back, but one of the most amazing young people I've ever been around. Now, just to give everybody context, he was the number one player in the nation in high school, and it wasn't close. And he tore his anterior cruciate ligament, his MCL, his ACL. He tore them all, and before he ever played a college basketball game. And he came back as a fifth-year senior and led us at UCLA in 1995, led us to the national championship. And it came full circle because he ended up being the National Player of the Year. So he went from being the National Player of the Year in high school to then the National Player of the Year in college 5 years later.
That's
But
awesome.
he's sitting around playing an EA Sports game one day with his buddies, and it's the '95 UCLA team, and it's a slender black guy that's number 31 who's left-handed, which is him obviously, and our whole team. And his buddy said, "Well, I mean, it's obviously you in the game. How much you getting paid for this?" And the answer was nothing.
Yeah.
And that began kind of that was the beginnings of this whole process. Sonny Vaccaro, who at one time worked for Nike. If anybody has seen the movie Air, Sonny's a really good friend of mine. Sonny was the one that kind of had the idea with Ed. They kind of came together and eventually got some other athletes and turned it into a class action suit. And that lawsuit against the NCAA went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they won. And and the verdict meant that student athletes could now be compensated for name, image, and likeness, which Ed at that time in '95 was not, and none of the players were back then. And so I kind of tell people all the time, uh, as young people right now are getting compensated in college, and student athletes are able to make money, everybody ought to donate 1% to Ed Oannon, because without him, there wouldn't be any NIL. We would not
Yeah.
know what NIL is.
Yeah.
And I got to know Johnny Manziel pretty well. I played golf with him a number of times, and Johnny Football from Texas A&M. And if you go back and look at his college career, he wasn't. He was probably at the height of his notoriety while he was in college. It wasn't in the NFL, but he wasn't able to make any money off of his name and image back then. So anyway, I'm excited for the student athletes nowadays. I think it's a great thing. Uh, there's still a lot of issues with how this is being kind of implemented, and the NCAA, in my opinion, has dropped the ball so many times on it. But at the end of the day, the fact that students, can make money is a great thing. I remember at NC State, I'm sitting there and I've got the ACC Player of the Year, TJ Warren. And you can go to
Hmm.
the bookstore on campus at NC State, and they're selling NC State jerseys with number 24 and Warren on the back. And the guy doesn't get to make a penny.
Yeah.
So that wasn't right. That's not fair. And we all, I think, would agree upon that. So, but Ed Oannon was the catalyst. He was the guy, along with Sonny Vaccaro. Sonny was in the background, but they got it done in a way that all of the athletes nowadays can benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And watching Ed and the lawsuit that I think all of America was honestly watching, or any NCAA athlete was definitely, watching that lawsuit. That changed the entire dynamics of college sports. What were your thoughts whenever you were watching it unfold firsthand?
Well, I've told Ed this many times. I'm so proud of him because it took a lot of courage,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for him to become the face of that. And to the point where now, he lives in Las Vegas. He works at a juvenile detention center with troubled children, and he kind of is a little bit out of the limelight. He really doesn't want the attention, and it just kind of tells you who he really is in his core. He did not
Mm-hmm.
do this for personal gain. It wasn't, that he could, make millions and millions of dollars himself, but it was for the good of the game and for the good of the student athlete. And that's who he is. That's
Yeah.
who he is at his core. And so I was incredibly proud. And I was incredibly proud that he fought the NCAA. I'm not a fan of the
Yeah.
NCAA
Yeah.
at all. I was on our NABC, our National Association of Basketball Coaches board for probably 10 or 12 years. I sat in meetings with Mark Emmert, who was the former president,
Mm-hmm.
and they were a pompous group. They were an arrogant group, and we kept telling them, guys, this is coming. This is going to happen. And the interesting thing is, Parker, I say this all the time to people. The NCAA basketball tournament, just the tournament, March Madness in basketball, college basketball for the men, it generates about $1.2 billion per
It's
year.
insane.
And
Yeah.
the frustrating thing for me to this day is they're still not sharing that money with the students. That
That's
that
crazy.
for you or for other athletes to get compensated, it's there. Um, but the NCAA should be sharing their money. They should be sharing. They're not sharing, and
Yeah.
still bothers me to this day. But they had a chance to kind of get out ahead of this. They didn't, and I'm thankful that Ed and Sonny and a bunch of other people came together and got it done.
Yeah, that's crazy. 1.2 billion. That's insane. That's great. That's a great fact. But I have to ask you: are you glad that you coached before this era? Or do you wish that this era started whenever your coaching career was active?
I'm mixed feelings on that. It's a great question. Part of it is, well, first of all, your school has to have money. I mean,
Right.
in today's game, it's the haves and the have-nots.
A
And
hundred
if
percent.
your school and your booster group and your collective and you got a chance to win. And some schools just don't have much, and they're in trouble because
Mm-hmm.
they can't get the same level of player. But on the other hand, you know what? I would have no problem with my players. And if they had opportunities, I mentioned T.J. Warren, Dennis Smith Jr., those guys in North Carolina. They were household names, and if they had the opportunity to do advertisements for car companies or television, whatever it may be, I'd have been happy for those guys because I think they deserve that. So,
Mm-hmm.
I'm mixed about it. I don't like the fact right now that there are no real rules around the NIL. In other words, I tell people all the time, college athletics right now today would be the equivalent of professional sports with no contracts, and
Mm-hmm.
that would be just mass chaos, and we would all
Yeah.
agree upon that. LeBron James would play on a different team every year. Whoever would pay him a little bit more money, he would go to the next team. And
Yeah.
so I don't think that's good for the game, and I don't think that's good right now in college athletics. I think kids, if you want to transfer one time without sitting out, fine. If your coach were to leave or to become fired, maybe there's an exception for that. But then after that, I think you go back to having kids sit out a year, and it would slow that portal down a little bit. And so anyway, there's a lot of things they could probably do to fix it. But in general, I'm glad that the kids are allowed to be making some money while they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good thing.
I agree with all that perspective. I agree with, obviously the making money piece, but with the transfer portal, that's a great idea with having them sit out after transferring one time because it can get very chaotic in there, and it's a madhouse right now in that portal. But everybody sees the grass is greener on the other side and how much money they can make somewhere else, and it's frustrating seeing some people ruin careers to try to go somewhere else, and obviously don't get the same opportunity or something. So that is something that I think the NCAA should definitely try to put in place.
I hope
100,
so. I
I
think it
hope
would
so
help the
too.
game. So, but we'll see what happens in the next few years.
You never know with them. That's the truth. Coach, when you look back on your career, what are you most proud of? Not just the wins, but the lives that you've touched.
I think most of us that have coached, and I got a lot of good friends in coaching, and I got a lot of good friends that have gotten out of coaching in the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of guys in the ACC have gotten out, but anyway, I've gotten to know a lot of guys. But I think we all would probably say the same thing. Winning championships, Sweet 16s, Elite Eights, Final Fours, national championships, they're wonderful. They are, and but I think what warms the heart of coaches is when you get a little bit older and that phone rings and it's one of your former players and they just want to check on you. They just want to say, "Hey, coach, how you doing?" And the relationships that you built along the way with your players, and hopefully the impact that you had in a positive way on your players, that's what stays with you forever. We all want to win. I was as competitive as anybody, and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to win, and I wanted to do things at NC State or Alabama, wherever it was that, maybe were difficult to do. I wanted to do that. But when the dust settles and all of that's gone away, it still comes back to the relationships that you built with your guys, because nothing can take the place of that. There's
Yeah.
nothing that's more impactful than hopefully having a positive impact on one of the guys that you coached.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, Coach Gottfried, what's next for you, man? Do you still have that, the itch to coach, or is it more of a season now of, reflecting and mentoring?
I never say never, because things can pop up. I'm still pretty young, but I do a lot of speaking around the country. I love doing my podcast, and I hope to have you on as one of my guests.
Oh
But
yeah.
the great thing about both of those things is I do feel like there's an opportunity to impact people.
Mm-hmm.
And, through the guests I have on the show, through my podcast, or when I have the opportunity to speak. And even when I speak, it's pretty authentic, it's pretty raw, it's pretty real, it's pretty transparent. I try not to hold too much back of the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm.
But so I enjoy that. I really like that a lot, Parker. But you just never know. I've had some opportunities overseas to coach that kind of somewhat interesting to me, just because I've never done that before.
Yeah.
But yet it might be kind of fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm kind of open to seeing what's out there every
Yeah.
day. And in the meantime, I'm in Newport Beach. I'm playing pickleball every morning, and life ain't bad. So
What a sport, man. The pickleball is top notch. That's where it's at. That's awesome.
it's a lot of fun. Matter of fact, I had Tyler Hansborough on my podcast, and people remember Psycho Tyler Hansborough is one of the great college basketball players of all time. But
Yeah.
that bad boy's gotten into pickleball at 6'9", so
Good
he's probably
lord.
smashing some balls at people every now and then. But
He's
it's a lot of fun.
covering the whole court.
Yeah.
What are some lessons that you've learned throughout your public speaking and going from city to city doing that?
I think Park, when I speak to people, I think we always want to be curious as people. We want to always learn, no matter what position we're in or where we are in life. And I'm still that way. I want to learn. I want to be curious. I want to ask questions. But kind of like I mentioned before, when I talk, I talk a lot about grit and developing grit, and some people are kind of born with this innate toughness to them, but
Mm-hmm.
some people have to learn it a little bit. You go through difficult times and you learn how important grit is. And I talk a lot about grit, and I talk a lot about integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, usually, Parker, when our integrity is hanging in the balance, and again, when I talk, I don't hold back on the fact that there have been a lot of times where I've made the wrong choice. Period. But usually, it's one of three lines. It's a small thing. Everybody else is doing it, or nobody will know.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, when we sacrifice our integrity, it's usually one of those three things that causes us. We fool ourselves, and then we talk about desire too, and just that love of what you're doing and trying to become the best. But so for me, I'm always trying to learn. I always want to learn from others, and I hope that even through my public speaking and through the podcast, that I can have a real impact on others as well.
Yeah. Well, you're doing that, my man, and we appreciate you coming on the show. Guys, I know that you can get a lot from this podcast. Man of a lot of wisdom, man that's done a lot in his life, a lot of successes, been through a lot in his life. So, Coach, thank you so much for coming on. I know the listeners will definitely enjoy this one. And what's your podcast name, just so that everybody can go and check you out as well?
It's called the Coach Mark Gottfried Show. It's real original, real original name.
Let's
But
go. That's good
it's
for
everywhere.
branding.
Spotify, YouTube. It's all over Google, Apple. It's on my website, which is at www.coachgodfrey.com. But Parker, let me say before we go off, man, it's an honor for me to be on your show. I've learned your story. I'm incredibly proud of you and what you've done and what you're doing. And man, you inspire more people than you have any idea about. You are that catalyst. And for me, I love NC State baseball. I love Alabama baseball. And I told you before we came on, uh, like I'm an absolute diehard nut for the Dodgers. I watch them. I think every
Oh,
day. I go
really?
up to Dodger
Well,
Stadium
what
about
a
three
team to
times.
watch.
They're pretty good. But now I am an East Carolina Pirate baseball
Let's
fan.
go.
So you can put
Let's
that one
go.
in the books.
Let's say, well, that's the best thing I've heard today. Let's go. Well, I appreciate that, Coach, and you inspire more than you think as well, and that's the goal in my life is just to reach others, show them that there's still hope. Adversity hits you in life, but God's plan's way better than anything I could ever imagine. Because my plan was to come here, be the starting shortstop for East Carolina, and have a great collegiate career, and hopefully go play in the MLB like every other kid's dream. But God placed the accident in my life that can use for good and show people that just because something happened to me doesn't mean that my story's over, or God's allowed me to have this platform now to have this podcast now, go out and speak and share His glory. And so it's an honor. It's an honor to have you on here. West Coast to East Coast is going to be a great thing that people to hear your story, because you have a lot to unpack. So we appreciate you coming on here, and I'm pumped to be on your podcast as well.
Thank you, Parker. I'm looking
Let's do
forward
it.
to it. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
sir. Of course, man. Thanks for coming on here, and sorry, I try not to take too much of your day, and hope everything goes well, and stay in touch, man, because
Will
um,
do.
I think this is a relationship for long term. So I
Yes,
appreciate it, my
will
man.
do, Parker. Thank you. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
sir. Thank you as well. Guys, what an amazing episode. Coach was amazing about, just being transparent about his life, the ups and the downs through divorce, getting fired, and all the lessons he's learned throughout that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys got something out of it. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes coming your way. God bless, and see you guys soon. Go Pirates.